very good. We're going to start now on the questions and answers session. But what I want to do first is I'm going to go around each table to ascertain the questions on which there is agreement by that table, and then we'll come back to questions.
Yeah. So we'll go in order.
Yeah, we'll start with table 1.
I am the facilitator for table 1. 1 is fine, 2 is fine, 3 is fine, but there was a note that there was a typo in what was provided, but that was fixed on the slide.
Yeah.
There is a question about 4. 5 is fine. There's a question about 6, 7 and 8. 9, 10, 11 are fine. There's a question about 12, 13, 14, 15 are fine, and then 16, there's a query about 16.
Thank you. Table 2.
I'm the facilitator for table 2. Numbers 1, 2 and 3 are okay. Numbers 5, 6 and 8. Numbers 10, 11, 14 and 15. And then the remaining numbers, there's recommendations that this isn't recommended.
Yeah, what ones do you have questions on, just that I'm clear in my mind?
So numbers 4, there's a recommendation.
Yeah.
Numbers 7, numbers 9, number 8, and number 16, and number 13 as well.
13.
So sorry, question 4, question 7 and 8, question 9, question 13 and question 16. There's recommendations in all of them.
Yeah.
And everything else is okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ross.
Thank you, Judge. I'm the facilitator for table 3. The citizens of this table are okay with questions 1 through 6, question 8, 10, and 12 through 14.
Yeah.
There are questions or clarifications required in relation to questions 7, 9, 11, 15, and 16.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Judge. I'm the facilitator for table 4. All questions were fine, with the exceptions of question 1 and question 12.
So everything but question 1 and question 12. Yeah, thank you very much. Table 5. Yeah.
I'm facilitator for table 5. The citizens were happy with question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12 and 15. They had a few small queries with question 2, 3, 4, and then there were questions about 7, 9, 14, 16 and 17.
There's no 17.
Oh, no, sorry. That's they had a suggestion.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
I am the facilitator for table number 6, and citizens at this table are happy with 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15. And then there's query or suggestions with question 1, 4, 8, 9 and 16.
Thank you very much.
I'm the facilitator for table 7. The citizens at this table have recommendations for questions 2, 3 and 4.
So everything else
Everything else is fine.
2, 3 and 4. Yeah.
Can I just ask, I know I'm going to breach the training that's been given to the facilitators, but there's no need to announce that you're the facilitator every time from each table, just in the interest of time. Or that the citizens have the following questions.
Anyway, and we can see the yellow.
Yeah.
The citizens of table 8 have queries around 2, 5, 8, 10, 15 and 16. They were happy with the other questions.
Say again, please, just
2, 5, 8,
Yeah.
10, 15 and 16.
Thanks very much.
The citizens at table 9 are happy with the questions, 8 questions, numbers 1, 3, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12 and 15, and they've comments and suggestions and queries in relation to the other questions, which are 2, 4, 5, 8, 9, 13, 14, and 16.
Thanks, Joe.
The citizens at this table have questions or comments about numbers 4, 8, 11, 14, and 16, and the rest are okay.
The citizens at table 11 are happy with questions 1 to 15 inclusive. They have a recommendation on an amendment to a piece of number 16, and they have also an additional question which they think would be suitable for the ballot paper.
Judge, I'm the... The citizens at table 12 are happy with 1 to 16 with the exception of 4, 14 and 15.
Thanks very much.
This table, we're happy with questions 1, 4. Oh, sorry, there was issues arising with questions 1, 4 and 11, and all the remaining questions were okay.
Okay.
The citizens at table 14 are happy with most of the questions. They just have issues with question 9, 10, 11, 13, and have some suggestions for 16.
Yes. Right. Now, how are we going to deal with this?
Yeah, okay.
Will we do it by question?
Yeah, I think so.
Like so?
If you just bear with us, we'll just tot this up.
Yeah, yeah.
So, question 1, there are only 3 tables that have questions. Question 2, there are 3 tables that have questions. Question 3, there
Can I have your attention, please? We have been looking at the return we've got from the tables, and that is very helpful. I'm very grateful to the members and to the facilitators for giving us that. Now, we have sort of done a little bit of sums here, and we see that the only questions in respect of which there are more than 6 issues are question 4, in relation to which 7 tables have an issue, question 8, in respect of which 8 tables have an issue, question 9, in respect of which 6 tables have an issue, and question 16, there are 9 tables have an issue with question 16. So, I mean, we are very limited in time, and it would appear, just taking an overview of it, that there is a majority consensus in relation to the remainder of the questions. The majority of the tables are happy with the remainder of the questions. What we decided probably is the most realistic way of dealing with it is to deal with those questions 4, 8, 9 and 16. So anyway, would we try that? Yes, Linda.
Can we deal with those 4, and then if we have time, go on to the others?
All right. Yeah, that's a practical suggestion. Yeah, and there are 4 questions in respect in respect of which 4 tables had a view, and then there were 4 tables in respect of which 3 tables had a view. So that's the way it pans out, but it's very, very helpful. So we'll start with question 4, and
I think we start question table 1.
Table 1. Did table 1 have an issue with question 4?
There was a query in relation to question 4, and the query was that the question is phrased as being related to additional funding.
Yeah.
And there was a query as to the meaning of additional funding in this context. Was it extra funding, additional funding raised by the state, or was it would it include the transfer of funding from other departments to be applied to the matters at hand?
Yeah. Yeah. Eamon, would you like to say something? We have been looking at that question as well. It relates to additional funding. In other words, it has a link back, as we framed it now, and whether this is a good idea or not is another day's work, but it's linked back to question 3, and it's additional funding in terms of question 3, and then this question 4 is trying to determine where it should come from, that additional funding. Whether that's a good idea or not,
and it might be useful for Eamon to explain our thinking as to
Okay, so I don't know what the other issues with question 4 across the other tables were, but just a suggestion or a point from my perspective, that at the moment it's set out as additional funding, as you know, if we want additional funding, but it might be useful to think about this question in terms of simply funding the overall system. So what way do you want to fund the system? Is it the whole system, including any additional funding? So at the moment it's funded through general taxation. So this question could be simply a question of where do you believe funding for care of older people should come from? And that simply becomes a question then. You go from option 2 to option 5, current taxation, a social insurance system, a long-term private insurance system, or some cost-sharing arrangements. That might simplify it and sort of have a relation to overall funding. But that's simply it's a very simple question. Then how should we fund the question?
Yeah.
If you remember, I gave a paper in the last where I talked about funding systems, and you know, some countries like Germany have a long-term care social insurance. Other countries do it by general taxation. and it becomes a very simple question. It's not tied to additional funding. It's simply, what way do you want to fund the overall system? So it's just a point of view.
Yeah, yes, that's very helpful. Table 5 had an issue on that.
Judge, the citizens were wondering, could they, instead of ticking one box, could they have an order of preference, 1 to 5? I don't know. There.
Is John there? Is John there?
We could do it.
Yeah,
we could
yeah.
do it.
I suppose it could be done. I mean, yeah.
Maybe we can consider it and see what other tables come back to it.
Yeah.
We'd have to put it to a vote.
Yeah, we'd have to put it to a vote
That change.
of the tables.
Maybe we'll keep going.
Yeah,
to get
yeah,
the other
yeah,
questions
but the
on.
other, yeah,
I think table 2 had a question. Is the same, okay.
yeah,
Any
all right.
other-
Any other questions on question 4?
So our table 7 had just a question in relation to this, I suppose, the sequential nature of the question 4 and anyway, the question 3 asks for a yes or no answer, and if somebody were to answer no, then they don't have an opt-out then in question 4, and that happens a couple of times, so we were just curious about that.
Yeah.
Do they just not vote on that question altogether?
The reason we did that was because well, number one, there are difficulties in doing a sequential ballot, you know, in terms of reporting, because there are questions arise. Do you discount that part? You know, if what happens, does that vote become redundant? If that question become redundant if the majority of the Assembly decides that they don't want to assign additional funding? But nonetheless, we thought this question as a standalone was an important question to ask of the majority, even if the majority felt that they didn't want additional funding, but there was a question there. And I suppose it goes back to Eamon's point about whether the additional piece. So if we were to recast the question to be of number 4, about a question about funding more broadly, that issue doesn't arise here. And I mean, I suppose we have to go around to other tables, but if that's a concern that's coming from tables, I think we can recast the question to remove the reference to additional. And I think it may address those questions that are coming from the
And in fact, it was because of the difficulty in counting the votes that we made a deliberate policy not to have an if at the commencement of question 4.
Okay.
We've given that a lot of thought, but I mean the point you make is a good point, unquestionably.
Okay. Yeah.
Anybody else on?
The citizens at table 6, it's similar to table 5. They would like to see the mark of X replaced with a weighted option, say from 1 to 5, and which would be the greatest weighting? Is 1 your first preference to 5? Just to clarify
right.
that.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
All right.
Table 10.
Yeah.
The citizens at table 10 had the same issue in relation to the options for for question 4, that there should be an option for no additional funding, and that same issue arose in relation to question 8 also.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Eamon.
So if you recast the question as a simple question on funding the overall system, you deal with that issue. You deal with that issue. It's not tied to question 3. Question 3 is a question on simply saying, do you think there should be more resources, yes or no, bearing in mind that you have to pay for, when you think about that question. Question 4 becomes almost a standalone question. What do you think about funding the overall system? So you could say no to question 3 then, but you could still answer question 4 by contemplating, I think there should be a different kind of funding system or the same kind of funding system.
Yes.
It separates it out very clearly, I think, and so on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody else want to say some? Yes.
The citizens at table 9 in relation to question 4 have 3 comments or queries or suggestions. The first one is seeking clarification on whether it is intended in relation to, not unlike the current PRSI mechanism, whether that implies or means that employers would also be asked to make a contribution.
Yeah.
Yes, is the
that's the PRSI system as it exists.
Yeah.
There's employer and employee contributions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. And the other suggestion is at option 1, reallocation of existing tax-based resources, to add in onto that more efficient use of tax-based resources.
Which, this is option 1?
Option 1.
Yeah, now if we were to go, as Eamon has suggested, if we were to go the overall funding approach, option 1 would be gone.
If we were to do that on option 1, we typically, because option 1 is obviously related to a belief from the earlier question that you don't think there should be additional resources because there's enough in the system. But if you don't tie the two of them together, it becomes a simple question of a funding question, and then it becomes that question 1 is redundant. Option 1. Sorry, option 1 is redundant.
You okay?
Okay. Table 13.
So there was a bit of a discussion in relation to option 1, whereby we were wondering if, I don't know if it's an ad-lib comment or something, but there was some reference to improvements in efficiency would also be included in that option. And if it's not actually explicitly printed there, but if that is the case and you take it out, then that option it's gone as well. So should that be explicitly put in then as an option outside of what the panel just said?
Well,
if that makes sense.
Well, so the efficiency question, and the reallocation question would come in. That if you say, well, do you think there should be, going back to question 3, and if you take away the link to question 3, you're simply asking a funding question. So you're not making any judgments on the efficiency of the system. You're simply saying there are 4 ways, well, as we have here, there are 4 ways to fund the system: general taxation, social insurance, private insurance, or co-payments. You're not making any judgment on the efficiency of the system. You're simply making a judgment on the financing of the system. The efficiency judgment comes in if you think, well, would only come in, and it's a really good point if you are relating this question to question 3. If you're talking about additional funding, because you could make the argument, no, there's no need for additional funding, just be more efficient. But if we're decoupling question 3 and 4, then that's no longer an issue. Or question 4 simply becomes a financing question.
Yes. Anybody else?
13.
The citizens at this table have a comment similar to comments that have been raised before, but just to explain the rationale. In reality, it may be desirable to have multiple sources of funding, and they believe this should be reflected in the options.
Say that again, please.
In reality, it might be desirable to have multiple sources of funding, and so they feel that there should be a means of reflecting this in their choices rather than simply marking one X.
So it's the rank order point.
You want the rank. That's it. Thank you.
Table 2.
And up to table.
Here, yes.
Table 2.
12 first.
Yeah.
Sorry, Judge. Table 12 concurs with 5 and 6, and they would like them ranked 1 to 5.
Okay. Say that again.
They want them ranked
1 to 5. The ranking. Oh, that's yeah. And I think table 2.
Just in relation to the removal of option 1 under question 4, it's just a proposal that for option 2 instead, if we remove the increase in and leave it to just general taxation and put increase in the bracket as one of the options under general taxation instead.
Yeah, that's what's been suggested. Thanks very much. That's very helpful.
That's good.
All right. Well, then maybe will I put? Oh, have we got another one? Yeah.
Citizens at table 10 just have a follow-up comment on question 4. They appreciate what the panel has said about the decoupling of questions 3 and 4, but that is not borne out by the wording of question 4, by use of the word additional. They're inherently linked.
Yes. Can I just at this stage indicate what, if we were to go the route suggested by Eamon, what would happen? Look back at question 3. The reference, the last sentence there would come out. some possible options for these areas of funding are provided in question 3 below. So that would come out. And then the question 4, the actual question, the word additional would be removed. So it would then read, where do you believe funding for care of older people should come from? And we could put in the word overall. I don't know whether it would add anything. Would we? What?
Overall would. I think overall might just.
Yeah, overall funding. All right.
Just put it up on the screen.
Yeah, overall funding. Yeah, and then option 1 is gone. And option 2, increase in, the words are gone.
Yeah.
And I think the rest of the options are okay. So you have option 2 becomes option 1, and it's general taxation. It starts off, and I was trying to put in as currently at the end of it. Option 3 becomes 2, option 4 becomes 3, and option 5 becomes 4. And then we'd do the rank in order of preference rather than mark X in one box. Yeah.
Something else there that you said?
As currently.
As currently.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Now, and did you took out this bit?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just when we were discussing this earlier, it might be more logical. I don't know how much difficulty this is going to cause, but it might be more logical if question 4 became question 5. And because question 5, as it is now, is linked to question 3, because it is dealing with the additional funding. Do you get? Do you see what I mean? Yeah. But that won't create too much difficulty.
No.
All right. Well.
We go for show of hands on those changes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm suggesting those changes. It's a matter for you to decide. So we might do it by a show of hands. In favour, those in favour of the changes suggested. Practically consensus, absolute consensus. Thank you very much. So that takes care of question 4.
Yeah.
Now, the next one is question 8. And we're doing the switcheroo of 4 and 5. Yeah.
And the end of question 3.
And the ending of 3, yeah. So this is question 8.
Yeah.
The citizens at table 9 have just suggested that a further option be put in as option 5, in that all health and care.
Is this on question 4?
No, 8.
No, 8.
Oh, fine.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, say it again, please.
Yeah, no worries. So question 8, adding in an additional option 5, which would be all health and care services for older persons to be regulated.
I think what you find there is that is in essence what we mean in question 7. Yeah. So by indicating yes, you're saying that in question 7, that regulation as it currently stands for designated centres for older people or designated centres for people with disability would extend to all health and social care services.
It's
so
just
we could
question
add in
7.
if we added in all
to question 7?
It's question 8, or maybe if you do it in 7,
it may not be necessary in 8.
In all other health and care
Yeah.
services.
Yeah. Put the all into question 7. With that, yeah. Yeah.
I am. Do we need option 5?
No. Because if you go
I
back
know,
to question 7,
yeah.
then you don't need it in option 5.
Yeah. Are you happy with that? That it's covered in question 7?
Yeah. All, yes,
Into 7.
change to all.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what?
Put all in 7.
All in 7.
The last line.
So it would
All,
be
all,
yes,
it-
of all,
all.
other health and care
Or
services.
all health and social, all.
It's
don't
of
need the
all,
other. All, yeah.
all, and we take out the other and replace it by all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What?
A related one, yeah.
Yeah.
Judge, the citizens were querying the word "and" in question 7. Is it older dependent people or older and dependent people? Which I know it says older and
7. Second last line.
in question 7.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Yes, because older people may not be dependent.
They may not be
dependent. So
They may
take
not.
out the.
Yeah, and if they're
Yes.
not dependent, they don't probably
Yeah,
need
take
the
out the and.
services.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Susan?
Yeah, well, we'd agree with you, that all older people will be dependent, and it is the older dependent people are availing of the health and social care services. So it would make sense to say older dependent as opposed to older and dependent.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take out the and.
Yes.
What you're suggesting is take out the and in 7, yes.
Yeah.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
The citizens at table number 6 would like to have a yes or no option for question 8 instead of X.
So they would choose just one?
No, for each of the sections they would like to say yes or no, rather than just an X on one particular option.
But the construct actually allows is essentially that, because you can tick X for all that you wish to see regulated. So where you don't put an X in, you're essentially saying no. So it's like individual questions, the way it's constructed, precisely for that reason.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Okay with that? Yeah. Thank you.
All right, yeah. Anybody else on question 8?
A concern was raised at the table that the decision to extend regulation might be unrealistic given the stringent standards that HICWA enforces at the moment, in that the regulation would not be appropriate if actually extended to care, for instance, in someone's own home. And that
I suppose just to be clear, there would be no intention for HICWA to go into anybody's home or whatever authority was to end up regulating. So the intention would be to regulate the service provider. So in terms of home care, what you'd be looking at to see is that the provider who's sending the people into somebody's home has the appropriate vetting in place, has the appropriate assessment systems in place, makes the appropriate checks to ensure that the care that's supposed to be delivered is being delivered, that the people who are going in are vetted to the highest standard. But there would be no intention that a regulator would cross the door of someone's house. We wouldn't see that as being an option there. But there is an underlying point there that the current system of regulation is not transferable. So it would not be appropriate to be applying the same standard of regulation in a long-term centre for care that has become somebody's home as you would apply in an area that's dealing with respite. Because you're right, those standards would be onerous and would likely put services out of action. So what we have been addressing with the Department of Health
and with anybody else who listen to us, is that actually we need a suite of regulations that are service specific. So then a service provider says, this is what I'm doing in this area, and we say, well, these are the regulations that are relevant to that area of service delivery. And that's the space we would be hoping to move into. We've published 2 papers on that this year, one relevant to care of the older persons and one relevant to the disability centres. And it has arisen out of our experience in the disability centres, where people are moving out into smaller and smaller settings. So now you cannot have the same standards applying to a centre that's essentially an apartment where 2 people may be living in. So there is a recognition of a need for service-specific regulations, for the point of view that you do not want to be putting people out. You don't want regulation to become the factor that stops a service being put in place.
Could I just add, sorry,
Yes,
Chair, could
yes,
I
Patricia,
just add,
please.
just there is a paper of the Law Reform Commission in 2011 which identifies and debates this issue about the different levels of care. So it's all about the regulation of the service provider in terms of the service provider employees, in terms of education, training and standards in terms of care. So it's not in relation to regulation in a person's home, just to emphasise that again. But very importantly, and I know over the 2 weekends people have raised issues about abuse and safeguarding of older people. So there may be circumstances where it is necessary to go into a person's home. And the National Safeguarding Committee at the moment are looking at legislation. Indeed, a private member's bill was introduced in April of this year, which got all-party support. It's going back to debate at committee stage in the autumn. And one of the issues in that bill is access where it's absolutely necessary to safeguard a person. And because of the constitutional right of privacy in a person's home, etc., obviously we need very specific legislation if that power has to be used under legislation. So if safeguarding arises, there may be a necessity to go into a person's home, but as I emphasise, we need very clear legislation in relation to that. But generally, in terms of regulation of home care, it's about standards of the service provider, it's about education and training. At the moment, you have people going into people's homes who actually, there's no standards applied to them, they are not trained, they don't understand dementia and all of those other things, and that's really, really important.
Yes. Yes, yes, Eamon,
so
please.
just maybe a suggestion then on option 3 would be care and support services delivered by service providers in a person's own home.
Yes. Yeah.
It might be more specific, if that's helpful.
Yes, I think so, yeah. And really the overall question, bear this in mind, the overall question is about regulation. It doesn't say what the terms of the regulation will be. That obviously would have to be determined later. But it's just about having the regulation. That's the important point. And as Patricia said, the National Safeguarding Committee is looking at a broader picture, and that will hopefully come down the road at some stage. Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Judge. A member at Table 2 has stated that they feel that Question 7 and Question 8 repeat each other. They would like Question 7 to be removed and to be placed as part of Question 8.
I suppose by having the 2 questions separately, it does allow people the option to say, well, actually, I don't think daycare services should be regulated, or I don't think respite services should be regulated. Now, obviously, I think they all should be regulated, but if you put the 2 of them together, you've removed that option. Yeah.
Katie, yeah. Table 9.
I have a question, just that question, in discussing Question 8, we have proposed changes to Question 7, I believe.
Yes, we have, yeah.
And one of the changes that has been proposed is that the regulation currently in place for residential centres should be extended to afford better protection to older dependent people.
Yeah, the ANG comes out,
I have a problem with that, or well, an issue maybe, in that we discussed last weekend that, you know, many older people are independent and consider themselves independent. So I would propose that that the wording be changed to older and older dependent people. I think putting all older people into the dependent, well, putting the services. Excuse me now, maybe I'm not making myself clear. The care services, I believe, should be regulated, but the care services will be provided to older people and older dependent people. Does that make sense?
Or is it just older people and take out the dependent?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that'll do.
Is that the crux of it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yes, yeah. That is better, I think.
I know. The citizens at table 8 would like the answers to question 8 ranked in order of preference.
Say that again.
They want the answers ranked for that question.
But they have the option.
Yep.
Ranked, yeah.
For question 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, to prioritise the regulation.
Just on that, I mean, we did reflect on this, and just thinking about back to the note about reporting and how this would be reported. So if we leave it as the current construct, the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly would be, in the event that the Assembly voted by a majority, for example, for option 1, 2, 3 and 4, the recommendations would be individual recommendations. The Citizens' Assembly recommends that regulation be extended to respite services, daycare services, care and support services, whereas if you do the ranking, that can't emerge as the recommendation.
Yes.
Yeah. It's probably of more value.
So it's the weighting. It's the weighting that we need.
The weighting, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there another question?
Yeah. No.
All right. Well, then maybe I'll just review and this what we've discussed and see can we agree on it. Question 7, first of all, there's a suggestion of some minor, I have to say, variations. So the second line would read, to afford better protection to older people, simpliciter. And dependent comes out.
In receipt of all health and care services.
Oh yes, I'm going on to that.
Yeah.
In receipt of all health and care services.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'll just read all of question 7. Do you think that regulation, such as that currently in place for residential centres, should be extended to afford better protection to older people in receipt of all health and care services?
Yep.
That would be question 7. And then it's a very broad question, and there's probably value in having it, and perhaps value in not including it in question 8 as was suggested, but I'd ask you to bear that in mind that it was suggested. Then question 8, if the government were to decide to extend regulation to other health and care services for older people, what other services do you believe should be regulated? And then we have respite services, daycare services, and then option 3, the wording suggested now is care and support services delivered by service providers in a person's own home. And then option 4 remains the same. And then I would agree with Sharon that it might be better, it would give more information to the Oireachtas to stick with the Mark X for each such service you wish to see regulated. So maybe we'll have a show of hands on those amendments to 7.
So, Chair, just to make sure that people know that they can mark X under all 4 boxes, 3 boxes, or 2 boxes.
Oh,
so
yeah,
it's the
yeah,
weighting.
absolutely. Yeah,
so
yeah.
rather than, you know, so
yeah,
that's
because it
very
says mark X for each service you wish to see regulated. So if you want them all regulated, you put in X opposite each one, or there may be some you, for some reason, you think shouldn't be regulated. So I think that would provide useful information to the Oireachtas. So maybe a show of hands on those amendments to 7 and 8. Well, there seems to be a majority. Yeah, very good. So We'll move on to question 9 now. Was question 9, there was the next one?
Yep.
So this includes all auto enrollment and...
Oh, yeah, yeah. Do you think the government should introduce some form of mandatory pension scheme to supplement the state pension? Yes.
Judge, the suggestion from this table is there should be a second option. Do you think that the government should introduce an auto-enrolment with an opt-out clause?
Yeah. 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 Any other thoughts? We'll come back to that. Yeah.
In relation to question 9, table 9 have suggested that there should be an additional question after question 9, which would entail, should the above be provided by 1, the state, or 2, privately?
The state or?
Privately.
Privately.
So assuming that you've answered yes to the question 9,
Yeah.
the supplementary question is...
The wording of question 9, however, is predicated on being a government scheme. So the question says, do you think the government should introduce some form of mandatory pension scheme to supplement the state pension?
Yeah.
So it's premised on it being provided by the state.
Well, not really, no. No. It could be private either, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I mean,
if you go back to the 3 pillars that were referred to yesterday,
Yeah.
so you had pillar 1 was the state pension, pillar 2 was the contributory, and then pillar 3 was your private PRSAs, AVCs, etc.
Yeah.
So
Pillar
it
2
was that
occupational.
middle option that would allow people to have income to supplement the state pension and improve their quality of life in old age.
Yeah. Eamon, do you have any view on that?
Well, as I understand it, the question is to give options in terms of what the approach should be in terms to improve the coverage of occupational pensions. Isn't that the case? That
Yes.
you want to keep it as open as possible where the policy change should come from. But the objective is to enhance essentially
The state
pension coverage. Yeah.
The state pension.
Yeah. So it really does depend on how much detail you want to get into. But the sort of almost the philosophical question is: do you believe there should be an enhanced or some intervention to increase coverage, and that could come from mandatory an auto-enroll system or PRSI, as I understand it. So it depends on what you think the essence of the question is. Is it simply saying yes, we believe this is necessary because pension coverage is likely to be underprovided?
And regardless of the terms of the contract, or regardless of whether you're independently self-employed or whatever. So that you've a mandatory base provision.
Yeah. In fact, what I said when just explaining the ballot, I referred to the fact that yesterday we heard about auto-enrolment, but also the other possibility of enhancing the existing PRSI scheme to supplement the state pension. So we're talking about supplementing the state pension, but there are a number of ways that it could be done, and one is auto-enrolment, another is possibly enhancing the PRSI scheme. But to the extent,
I'm just wondering, do we know enough? Do we know enough to make these kind of specificities, given that the literature isn't always as clear?
And auto-enrolment appears to refer to some occupational schemes and not to people who are self-employed. So if we get into the detail, we might be losing something in it. So
I mean, I was thinking, I suppose when we were thinking about this, I was thinking, do you go the UK route? That's one, which is auto-enrolment. That's one possibility. Or do you go a PRSI route, which I think Alan was very keen on yesterday, wasn't he?
Well, he was the one who introduced it and then went on to say that he wasn't even sure he was in favour of it himself. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an issue of whether we know enough. We have enough expertise to get into the detail. I think that's the problem, and that's why we framed it so generally. We thought of going into the detail, and then we thought, well, really, maybe we don't know enough about this. Sorry.
Can I just add into this that this is in the context of where we came from, and we had a meltdown in 2008. People's private pension providers, some of them went to the wall. They were left with no pensions. I, for one, if I want a mandatory scheme or an auto-enrolment, I would prefer the safer option of enrolling into a scheme provided by the state. So an enhanced PRSI scheme, I think, is the safest one. For me, a pension scheme where I would be auto-enrolled into a pension that would be decided by my employer is not acceptable. And that's in the context. That's the context of it. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Table 14 would just like to add on to the end of the question that would put in within a specific time frame. So it doesn't get long-fingered.
Time frame,
What does that mean? The citizens at table number 6 would like to see the amendment of some form to a form, which would be sorry, question 9. Do you think that the government should introduce some form of mandatory pension scheme to supplement the state pension? A form rather than some form.
A form, yeah, that I agree. Much better language,
Thank you, Judge. A citizen at table 2 has suggested for question 9 that the word mandatory is removed and the word additional is added in its place.
I don't know that that do the business. What do you think?
Or something similar to that effect, the citizen would like to see a change.
But the word supplement there, request suggest additionality.
Yes. Because it's a pension to supplement the state pension.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some form of scheme.
Just as it was stated yesterday that not everybody requires an additional pension, and that not everybody below a certain earning limit can afford a pension.
Unless we did a mandatory, non-mandatory, and
well, you could, or you could say introduce a form of mandatory pension scheme with suitable built-in flexibilities to supplement the state. The mandatory is the issue that you have, is it?
Yeah, it's mandatory is the issue. Yeah.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
But isn't the issue then without mandatory that it's the status quo?
Oh,
It is as we are now.
Yes.
Something new that's not there now. Sorry, something new that's not there now, so it's an addition. So whether it's going to be optional or voluntary, or how it's going to be funded or opt out, we're talking about a principle. So there are currently pensions available, but what we're being asked is, do we want something else that would supplement? So the supplementary pension and the scheme are separate.
There are, you can supplement your pension at this stage, your state pension.
Not everybody. So if we're talking about a universal scheme that will allow people to supplement their pension, and whether that's voluntary or not is the next stage. But
Patricia,
principle.
what do you think?
Yeah, It's just to spread. I mean, I suppose the thing is to get coverage, and the point about people can't afford to pay. Well, if they can't, that's in terms built into the scheme that they don't have an obligation. They're the flexibility. So I would go with Sharon. I just feel at the moment you can supplement your pension.
Yeah.
You can supplement your pension.
You can take out a private pension.
Yes, you can take a
if you can afford
PRSA
to,
or whatever. So this is really to cover people who have not covered in occupational schemes. They may be working 0 hours and whatever, but there would be a basic mandatory. If they can't afford to pay, that's taken into account in the scheme and whatever. I think it's a very broadly drafted question to try and pick up. The report maybe spells out some of the detail.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judge. The citizens at table, on table 3 had a similar theme in relation to question 9, that possibly the question would be amended to clarify that mandatory does not necessarily mean compulsory, but that it would in some way accommodate auto-enrolment or also opt-out.
That's a point, isn't it?
With the other two.
What is the difference between mandatory and compulsory?
Yeah, Katie,
A citizen at this table wanted to emphasise that they would have an objection also to joining a mandatory scheme if it was privately run and picked by the employer.
Well, this is the government to supplement the state pension.
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So I think the essence here is that you want to have a question which allows it to express that the Assembly wishes there to be additional pension provision and coverage, but you don't want it to be mandatory, and you want it to be able to express the views of the Assembly that schemes like auto-enrolment or PRSI is what you mean by that, but we haven't the expertise or the time to get into understanding which one of those you feel would be preferable, even though some of you already clearly have a view. So, to achieve that, I think we need to delete.
Well, I think my inclination is that there's no point in having it unless it's mandatory. I may be wrong on that, but...
there's a few hands going up, and maybe people...
Yeah.
Dave, yeah.
Sorry, I just want to put the point that question 9 as it stands, do you think the government should introduce some form of mandatory pension scheme?
It's going to be a form of
But as it stands,
No, but that's what I'm saying, as it stands, some form of mandatory pension scheme to supplement the state pension, as is written, is fine, in the sense of that leaving in the word some covers that option where there's queries about should it be mandatory, should it be not. Having the word some means that there's room for manoeuvre with it if it actually comes to the debate now, but to actually just get the vote done on the question, that as it's written there now is suffice to have a ballot on it, rather than, because there's the suggestions that are coming up are all valid, but there's more and more of them coming, and it's removing. What we need to do for most of the questions is to make them broad in their structure, but simplistic at the same time that we can get them through. There's always going to be room for debate, additions and all that at a later stage, but to get the actual vote through, to keep it as simple and broad as possible, but it still keeps the core of what the question is about. So leaving the word some in leaves the room, in my opinion, for whether it's a mandatory, whether it's an opt-in, whether, you know what I mean? But at the question as it stands, for the case of just getting the ballot, in my opinion, it's fine.
Any other views on that?
I'm just wondering whether we should introduce another mandatory or compulsory or any kind of tax in Ireland. Already people are paying the universal social charge, and look at the pension levies people are already paying. And I think, over the past few years, people have looked at their pay slips and just wondered, you know, how much more are they going to have to pay? Surely there should be enough there in the kitty already to cover any additional costs.
Yeah, but then you can answer no, I suppose, is the answer to that. Yeah, yeah.
A number of speakers have suggested that removing the word mandatory out of the question might be of assistance. Surely we have a voluntary system of additional contributions at the moment.
Yes.
So we have that already. So if we want something different, it has to be mandatory and not voluntary.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, is there an OECD recommendation that we do it?
Yes.
I think, isn't there?
Yes, I think
Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
yeah.
And it just seems to me that that you're being asked to think about additional coverage, and I think that's the essence is additional coverage.
Yeah.
And I know people have different views about how that should be framed, but I think it's a realization that coverage isn't adequate at the moment.
Yeah.
So, yes.
And I think the OECD have recommended that it should be.
Yes,
it should be mandatory. Yeah.
I think this has to be the last one.
Sorry, there's a split actually at this table as regards the mandatory term.
Yeah.
I would thoroughly be in favour of mandatory, because I think it would also mean that employers would have to opt into it if it was mandatory, and provide a pension system for young people in particular who don't realise that they need a pension when they get older, like me, and because they get carried away in relationships and children and mortgages, and they just keep drifting it back. So I think if it's mandatory, no matter how small it is, in the beginning, would be the best option. And if you say mandatory, it has to be done.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm the split at this table. No, I just believe that if we bring in...
There won't be fisticuffs
if
if
we bring in a mandatory pension scheme to supplement the state pension, all there is an additional tax, because you've already paying your PRSI for your basic pension. You're going to have your universal social charge was going to be incorporated into the PRSI system, and then you're asking people to pay an additional tax to supplement their pension.
But we haven't precluded that it's so general. The possibility of being able to opt out isn't precluded. Isn't that right?
Yeah. But you can't opt out if it's mandatory. You can't opt out if it's mandatory.
Well, you can in the auto.
My understanding of what was being delivered yesterday was auto enrolment, you were automatically enrolled in it. But if your circumstances changed, then you could increase or decrease your contributions to it. And I think one of the speakers actually said you could stop your contributions for a period of time.
That's not mandatory then.
The scheme is there and you're enrolled in it.
The scheme is there, but the terms of the scheme are variable, I suppose, is the answer. I think what we should do in relation to this is we should put it to you, and we may have to do a count on this one, but I remind you there is a no option if you don't like it. I think maybe we should have a show of hands on question 9 in its current form. Those in favour of question 9 without variation, put up their hands.
It's a majority, it's a majority.
Well, but then we just, those are against...
Yeah, against.
Yeah, it is a majority, yeah. So we leave it, and we leave it as some form.
Yes.
Yeah, are you happy enough with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the report can go into some of the detail.
Yeah, and in fact, it will, the report, because we have very, very good material on this in the papers. Yeah. All right, that's it. So, and we've just 16 left.
I know we're running on, but in the interest of getting, we will do the last question and then we can have a break and have tea and so on. But we've just one last question, so if you can bear with us, I think it will ultimately get us out of here quicker if we can try and get 16 done.
I agree. Yeah. So we're on to 16 now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's a lot in 16.
10.
Would we?
10. For 16.
I mean, it needs to be reframed to a certain extent. I'm going to call them issue 1, issue 2, issue 3, and issue 4, just for the moment anyway. And I think maybe first of all I'll deal with each one separately, and I'll start with issue 1. The responsibility for older people should be formally devolved to the relevant Minister of State. Or the question would be, should the responsibility, or if it's they're ranked in order of preference, it probably should be the way it is, their responsibility.
We just take.
Yeah, I'll hear about question 1. Issue 1, rather. Yes, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yep. No, in terms of issue 1, the view of the table is that should be separated in to a separate question. Should the responsibility for older persons be formally devolved to the relevant minister, and that the answer be a yes or a no rather than a ranking?
A way which we could do or reflect that is to change the answer here from rank in order of preference to tick each one which you believe should be the same construct as
the
we
yes
had
or, the yes or no. Yeah.
No, not yes or no. Tick each one.
All right. All right. Yeah. Tick each
so it'd be
one.
mark X for each option that you wish to see introduced or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Implemented.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else in relation to issue 1? Yeah.
Judge, the suggestion is that the word relevant be removed and include Minister for State at the Department of Health.
Yeah.
The only issue with that is there is more than one Minister of State at the Department of Health, and the title can change. So like where we had the Minister for State for Older Persons, it has now become
Mental health and older persons.
Mental health and older persons. So from a government programme to a government programme, the number of Ministers of State can change and the title can change as well.
And also I would add that the Department of Social Protection have a huge responsibility in relation to older people, and the whole question of financial pension and abuse is a huge responsibility. At the moment, this year 7.2 billion is paid out to our 600 over 66 people, a high element of financial abuse. So I would say the Department of Social Protection has a huge responsibility.
And just to further supplement that, oftentimes a Minister of State will straddle more than one department, and it's arguable that perhaps in relation to older people that there are arguments in favour of why that might be.
And housing for older people, and you know, the whole question of well-being of older people. It's not just a health issue. So healthy older people also somebody needs to have responsibility to make sure they live well.
Can I just add one point to that?
Yes, certainly.
I think there is great merit in having a specificity for that Minister of State for older people, solely for older people, given the cross-cutting element of that, and not. You know, I think if you want to emphasise the importance of older people, then I think it might be useful to focus the Minister of State only on older people, because there's so much cross-cutting, because it's not at the moment. I'm simply suggesting.
Well, unless we said devolved, and I wonder should it be delegated, the Minister of State for older people.
Yeah.
Would that help? Sorry?
Devolved to a dedicated. So the suggestion from the floor is devolved to a dedicated Minister of State. Yes. So it would read.
Yes, the department.
Okay, we take.
Were we not told yesterday that there's a specific requirement in law that the relevant minister has to devolve the responsibility down to the Minister for State, so that he has that responsibility? So devolved is the word that's required here rather than any other word.
Well, actually, we've looked up the act.
And it's delegated.
Delegated.
Yeah. It was originally the Ministers and Secretaries Act of 1924, believe it or not. It's now the Ministers and Secretaries Amendment Number 2 Act, 1977. And what it says in the first subsection is, it shall be lawful for the government by order made on the request of a Minister of the government to delegate to a Minister of State assigned to the Department of State of which the Minister of the government has charge all powers and duties of such Minister of the government under any particular act or any particular statutory power or duty of such Minister of the government.
Yeah, it's catchy.
It's,
so yeah, the word is delegated. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we're currently discussing, I think the construct would be the responsibility for older people should be formally dedicated to
Delegated.
Delegated, Shani, to a dedicated Minister of State for older people.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Thank you. There was a point of clarification requested from the citizens on table 3. Is the suggestion to use the Minister of State to address the limitation on the number of ministers to 15 in the Cabinet and to provide access to the Cabinet decision making?
Yeah, well, that I think is outside our remit, really, isn't it?
I think so.
I think it's outside our remit. It's interesting, but it's outside our remit, I think.
Citizens at table number 6 would like to, just on the previous what we were talking about, would like to see the word sole responsibility for older people.
I think that's covered if you say dedicated Minister for older people.
Yeah.
Okay, so that one.
Yeah. I think maybe we could put this to you now because we'll be here till Tibbs Eve. So it would now read, the responsibility for older people should be formally delegated to a dedicated Minister of State for older people. Are you happy enough with that wording? A show of hands? All right, yeah. I mean, I suspect it's not perfect.
Yeah.
But on the basis of the information we have, I think is the best we can do with it. All right, we'll move on to question issue 2. That was have a dedicated one-stop shop for older people, and we're going to have to whatever way should there be a dedicated one-stop shop for older people to access information about their entitlements. And run a national campaign to support it. That wording isn't very good. I don't like it a lot. We were talking about it earlier, and I'm just throwing this out as a possibility. I'm not trying to sell it or anything. Have a dedicated point of contact for older people to access information about their entitlements, and have a national awareness campaign on these matters. Something like that might be better. But I'd hear your views because I know they'll be helpful.
Thank you, George. A citizen at this table would like to see a recommendation put in that an automatic letter is sent out 5 years before the retirement age, and this letter would state the stamps and entitlements of a person going into retirement. And I'd like to see this put as part of issue 2.
Yeah. 5 years before retirement. Yes.
Regarding issue 2, the wording is fine, but just to, where it says about their entitlements and run an education campaign to support it.
Yeah.
we were thinking to stick in or add in including accessibility supports, because that incorporates the isolation issue or lack of broadband or lack of computer skills for elderly people. But if it's included in, if it's emphasised in it that including accessibility supports, it means it's not, the onus isn't put on the older person to, oh well, you know, well, it was out there, it was up to you to find it. You know, it puts a bit of responsibility on the government to actually make sure they get access to it.
Yeah.
The citizens of this table just want to clarify. They wanted, rather than ranking in order of preference, to be able to say yes or no to each option. That was mentioned in the discussion of the first question, but it wasn't. They're not clear as to whether or not that was adopted.
We haven't come to it yet, but I mean, take the point. Yeah, it's a good point. Any other issue on 2? All right. Is there any way, do you think, that we could frame it so that the onus is on the state to make the contact, rather than the onus being on the elderly person to access the information?
To have a statutory provision whereby, you know, because see, if we have a dedicated minister,
yeah,
you could so have a statutory provision whereby there is a point of to provide for a point of contact.
Yeah.
And then you're saying you want a piece of legislation to provide for that.
But it's not really the point of contact to be made or put in legislation. It's that the.
But for the government to, you know, it's statutory provision that the government provide a point of contact.
Yeah, but do you have to make the contact? Yeah. If I want to find out what my social insurance contributions were, do I have to make the contact, or is there an obligation on Sligo to write to me and tell me how many I have? That's it. I think that's.
It's a very
I think it's a separate point.
I think
yes.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
I think it's a separate point. If you tie the two of them together, you lose the value of one or the other. So the question is, should it be an additional point?
Yeah,
yes.
I think so.
Which also is the support point.
All right. Well, first of all, we'll put the revised wording on this, and I'm conscious of the suggestion that they should move within 5 years before retirement. We'll come back to that. But for the second issue, should there be a dedicated point of contact for older people to access information about their entitlements, and should there be a national awareness campaign on these matters? Yes, certainly.
Sorry, just to make the point, I think when you look at the Health and Safety Act, people just call it health and safety, but in actual fact, it's health, safety and welfare. And I think under that act, at 50 you should be told what your social welfare contributions are every year from then on, and what your pension entitlements are every year from then on. Number 2, there's so much information out there, it's overload.
Yeah.
There's so many organisations out there telling you about pension schemes, about entitlements. It's overload. One of the good things about the HSE is there's no problem getting information, but information doesn't cure a patient. Yeah. It doesn't cure one patient.
But I think this this issue is about entitlements to state benefits.
Yeah. One of the most frightening things I discovered before I retired, that people died and their wives had to come to the HR department to find out exactly what their pension was. Yeah. Whereas nowadays, you're told every year that in the event of something happening that year, this is what your pension entitlement is equal, and this is what your social welfare contributions entitle you to.
Are you told?
Well, you're told in some jobs.
In some offices?
In some, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But to me, it should be mandatory that if you pay into a pension scheme, you should be made aware from 50 onwards what your pension contributions are. And the same with social welfare contributions.
Yeah.
Under the Health and Safety and Welfare Act that we have.
Yeah, I think we're confusing a number of things. I mean, it's certainly the case that if you have a private pension with, say, an insurance company, you're notified every year of the current value of your pension.
Yes.
Yeah, every year. I
You
don't know
have to be. You have to get a benefit statement and
Yeah,
details.
yeah.
So whether you're in employment or whether you're retired.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but
I think this question is asking us to bring together.
Yes, it's coordination.
It's a question about a coordination and integrated
Yes.
approach to
Yes.
information and advice. So let's not lose track of the essence. There's a lot of information sources, as the last speaker says, around the place. But this one is to bring together.
Yeah.
So I think it's just maybe that's the essence of the question.
Yeah.
Is to make it simpler.
Yeah.
In some way. It's not that government should be mandatory. We're not saying government should notify everybody, but make it simpler.
Yeah.
Defined benefit scheme. Okay. I was in a public benefit defined scheme, and we started that every year from the age of 60 onwards, people were told exactly what their pension entitlements were. And we got the social welfare done as well.
Yeah.
That we didn't have widows or partners coming up to work the office. What's my husband's entitlements? They should know. And I think under the Health and Safety and Welfare Act, it's covered. Because it is welfare.
But say if you want to know about Fair Deal, or you want to know about if I get dementia and I want to do an EPA, there is no single point of contact. You know, people are, where do they go for all of that diverse type of information? And it's really about getting a coordinated contact point for various different pieces of information.
Well, is the word entitlements sufficient to cover that?
Not really. I mean, it's wider than entitlements, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's about information about for ageing and so, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Services, support, and
Yes.
Yeah.
I think
Services,
supports, and entitlements.
Yes, yeah, that might be better.
Might just
Services,
supports, and entitlements.
and entitlements.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Can I make a suggestion that the state to proactively provide information to older people about their entitlements and care options through fora such as one-stop shop facilities? So that the onus is shifting back, that the state have to take responsibility for pushing the information out or making it available, but you're still getting the coordination point through the one-stop shop. So state to proactively provide information to older people about their entitlements and care options through fora such as one-stop shop facilities.
Can you just say that again?
Of course. State to proactively provide information to older people about their entitlements and care options
And services.
through fora such as one-stop shop facilities. It's just a suggestion. I don't think, in terms of there was a recommendation from one of the other tables about the issuing a letter, whereas of itself it might be a good suggestion. I don't disagree with it, but I don't think we should be getting into what the elements of an education programme should be. The report possibly could make reference to give examples, but in terms of a vote, I don't think we should be voting on any element of what an education programme would look like.
Sorry.
Citizen at table number 6 would like to pose this question. Currently, the Citizens Information Services provide information on services for older people. Data does not equal information, so it is necessary for someone to debate similar to the advocacy available for the disabled. Should this service be extended to the information services for older people?
It's a difficult one, you know.
I think it's really important in this question that we don't create dependency where none exists. So we just have to be careful with the words we use about dependency and care options. I mean, the majority of people are well and independent, and they may have questions about services and supports. I think just be careful about language in terms of care support. I mean, services, support, entitlements.
Yeah.
It's just a question of just making sure that these are citizens like you and me, you know, we don't necessarily consider ourselves dependent.
A bit. Have you put it up?
Yeah, have a dedicated point of contact for older people to access information about services, supports and entitlements and national awareness campaigns.
There is on the screen the revised version I called out. That's instead of issue 2 as it is currently worded.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that's fine. Yeah.
I mean, I think we could dance around on this for a long time about trying to get the correct wording, and I think the essence of what we're trying to get at is there's an understanding that it's difficult sometimes for older people to access information. If the Citizens' Assembly were to vote in favour of this by a majority, that would be a recommendation to government to do something about it. We can capture some of the points that have been raised around the table. We have a stenographer here today. We can capture them in the report as to what we were talking about, but the essence would be captured in that question. And perhaps we should put that to a vote of the members to agree that rewording and move on from there. Will we do that?
Yeah, Linda's. Yeah.
Linda's was
Yeah.
proactively providing
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Would we try that? Yeah.
So can we have a show of
Yeah. Can we have a show of hands for that?
wording?
And again, we might expand on it in the report in relation to the questions, the points that were made. For instance, in relation to the relevant department furnishing the information. Was the show of hands okay?
Yeah, it was. It's carried.
All right. So that's the third issue. Does anybody have? It's woolly. I think that the remaining 2 issues are fairly woolly, and that's been deliberate. Does anybody have any observations in relation to those 2 issues? The remaining 2 issues in 16, as I say, they are woolly. Now, does anybody, and I think there are people who do want to add to 16? Yeah.
There's a suggestion for another issue to be added, which is as follows. The state should promote, encourage and organise non-financial intergenerational transfer, for example, interactions between school children and the elderly, and it was referenced in tilde.
Can you call that out again, Joe,
Yep.
please?
The state should promote, encourage and organise non-financial intergenerational transfer, for example, interactions between school children and the elderly.
Yeah. I suppose that sort of work has been largely done by NGOs at the moment. And we heard from Ita yesterday. I thought what we heard was very, very interesting. What do you think, Patricia? I mean, would the state get involved in that, or would it be better to leave it to NGOs and maybe get some funding for NGOs?
Well, I suppose if the state promotes, it could leave it to the NGOs.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
So you think it's not a bad idea?
It's wide enough.
It's wide enough. Yeah.
So it's really just to have it on Age Society and have that conversation and communication.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Sorry, no, just in relation to that, the bit of background to it is essentially the Department of Education and the example of school children and the elderly, which is obviously a state organisation.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, but it's terms phrased in fairly broad terms, and I don't see any difficulty.
Well,
with it.
could we leave out school? I mean, it's intergenerational.
That was only put forward as an example. Now it could cover much wider.
Yes, and it should.
field,
And it
yeah.
should.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have a view on it?
Table 14 would like to add in something along the lines of that elder abuse needs to be properly legislated for as a priority.
Oh, yeah. Right. Patricia, do you want to say, just explain where we're at the moment on that?
Well, I suppose one of the issues first, it was mentioned by the Chair this morning about the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act of 2015. And in that act, there are a huge number of reporting obligations for people who are interacting with older people in assisting them making decisions, being co-decision makers, and also for EPAs and decision-making representatives. So that's one element of safeguarding. On the other hand, as I've already said, the National Safeguarding Committee has as its main strategy zero tolerance of abuse, and as its main action plan is the enactment of adult safeguarding legislation to have an independent national safeguarding authority, with various, obviously, working out the organisation and structures of service providers to ensure that they have dedicated people in relation to the whole question of reporting, safeguarding and issues. So, as I said, it's coming back to the Oireachtas at committee stage in the autumn, and certainly the National Safeguarding Committee comprises about 27 different organisations, both state, non-state, public, private. So we have say the Law Society, the Department of Social Protection, Department of Health, HICWA, Age Action, Alzheimer's, SAGE. So 27 different organisations, all coming with different perspectives, but actually informing our debate about what should that legislation look like. We're hoping that the Law Reform Commission will look at the issue at the moment formulating their 5th programme of law reform. So if there are issues you want on their agenda, they're looking for submissions, but we're hoping they will do a piece of work, and the IPA are already working on a piece of research in relation to, again, the structure of the National Safeguarding Authority. So there's a lot of work currently being done on that. The whole issue of financial abuse, you saw the HSE figures there a week or so ago. That's only the tip of the iceberg. Certainly organisations working with vulnerable people or people who may be in vulnerable situations, huge issues of abuse. And as a society, we have no we have no real legislation to underpin or what do we do in those situations, or indeed do people know who they have to report to in particular situations. The HSE have their protection teams around the country. It's not underpinned by legislation, and we have a situation where they cannot go into things like private nursing homes if they're not allowed. So there's a lot of work that has to be done in the whole area of safeguarding vulnerable adults. It took us a long time to get children, and we need it for adults.
How could the members, I'm sure everybody in this room feels the way it is in favour of that suggestion. How could we frame it in general terms?
The urgent need to enact legislation to safeguard, vulnerable, and I leave it very wide. People who may be in vulnerable circumstances or vulnerable positions. Additional,
older people who yes. How would that?
The urgency is there. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I think once it's urgent. Because I think I'm personally of the view that people who aren't, it's very well to have committees and to speak about these things, but unless you actually have legislation, no one will be prosecuted.
Oh yeah, but the whole objective of the committee is to move it along. I mean, and they are doing very, very good work on that. But I suppose there are two aspects to it. There's commencing the relevant provisions of the 2015 Act.
Yes.
That's one aspect that requires
Yes.
to be dealt with urgently. And secondly,
maybe include that as well, because
yeah.
while work has been done, the codes are being written for the 2015 Act at the moment. But we are the last country in Europe that hasn't ratified the UN Convention, which is a disgrace.
Yeah.
So, you know, the urgency of, we have the enactment of the 2015 Act.
What would the wording be?
Yeah.
The urgency of the commencement of the remaining provisions of the Assisted Decision Making Capacity Act 2015, and then the urgency to enact legislation in relation to adult safeguarding.
Yeah. Or safeguarding adults against elder abuse, or do just...
Just vulnerability covers, because you've all the spectrum.
Safeguarding vulnerable adults.
Well, you know, again, being politically correct, people say people who are in vulnerable situations, adults who are in vulnerable situations.
Adults who are in vulnerable situations.
The state should urgently commence the remaining provisions of the 2015 Act and urgently enact legislation
in relation to the safeguarding of adults who may be who are in vulnerable or may be in vulnerable situations.
Yeah. Would the members be happy with that wording? Yeah. So just a show of hands, just to be clear, so that will be added on as issue 5. We'll just put in the whole name of the 2015 Act.
Yeah.
I think.
What about the other suggestion from table 9 about state should promote, encourage, and organise intergenerational transfer?
Oh, I thought. Did we
vote on that?
The one about intergenerational transfer, we didn't vote on that, did we? From table 9. Are the members in favour of that addition?
So the wording that was suggested was the state should promote, encourage and organise intergenerational transfer, for example, between school children and the elderly.
Don't use the word elderly, older people.
Old people, yes. Older people.
Non-financial.
Non-financial.
Brackets non-financial.
Yeah. Very good. Would the members be in favour of that?
Show of hands.
Show of hands, please. Very good. Well, that seems to be the majority. So then we have 2 additional issues.
Yeah.
So I think we should call it a day there.
Well, the final thing to be decided is the rank and order.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I thought we were just going to do the mark X, yes, no.
But we didn't take a vote on it.
Oh, we'll take a vote on that. I think it's a wise thing to do, rather than, because they're so unrelated, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Would you be happy with rather rank and order of preference? Would you be happy with the mark X for yes or no?
Yeah. Okay.
Hands up.
Mark X.
Mark X. It's a yes or no. Yeah, yes or no. All right, I think that's passed as well.
Great.
Yeah.
So the ballot paper is almost printed. You'll be happy to hear just this last one to do. So get your coffee, and we'll be setting up the ballot paper, and we'll start instructing you when it's available. And the facilitator should also leave at this point. Thanks.